What's going on, guys? Bowen's back in the shop for more shock talk, and today I'm blessed to be able to talk about OME's full line of shocks. Now, OME's been one of our favorite brands for a long time because they look at upgrading your vehicle from a holistic approach, with suspension just being a piece of the puzzle. Their parent company, ARB, makes a ton of heavyweight upgrades to help you traverse many miles off-road. So their suspension setups from OME, of course, are really optimized to be paired with those kits. So they're a great choice, regardless of which one you choose, for your average heavyweight overlander or somebody who might be having a little fun off-road on the weekends but still has to tow and haul all through their week. For about as long as I can remember, OME shock options were limited to some version of their Nitrochargers or Nitrocharger Sport twin tubes. But a couple years back, they released these BP-51s to highlight the top of their range, and they really quickly became one of, if not our favorite, more trail-oriented options. What did take us a little bit by surprise was earlier this year, they filled the gap in their model range with their MT64 monotubes, which we're super excited about. This gave them a more budget-oriented option for you guys who are a little tight on the dollar, a high-end option for you guys wanting the best of the best, and then a good bang-for-your-buck option in the middle for most of you enthusiasts who don't have $1 million to spend on your suspension. Now, everything OME makes is really designed to be paired with their whole suspension systems. As I said, they look at upgrading your vehicle holistically. So, although we're talking about just the shocks today, just remember we're speaking to them through the lens of them being paired with their springs and other components that make up their complete lift systems. Many of us here at Shock Surplus have run some version of the Nitrocharger or Nitrocharger Sport at some point. As far as entry level and budget options, they're a pretty solid choice for somebody who has a fair amount of weight in their rig. They are still a twin tube, which means they have little pistons, they're limited on dampening force, and don't have a lot of oil, so they can fade fairly quickly. But that twin tube design means you can take a couple dents to the body, and they'll keep on trucking, and we found them to be able to withstand at least some moderate off-road abuse. So what did they change when they went to the Nitrocharger Plus? Well, to kind of better understand the updates and upgrades to the Nitrocharger Plus, let's kind of go into what the Nitrocharger was. By comparison, whereas most of their competitors like the Bilstein 5100s were ride height adjustable using circlip grooves on the body like these MT64s, and allowed you to use the stock springs and get some lift, OME designed the Nitrochargers to be paired with their wide variety of lifted coils, at least on strut suspension, so that you basically get the lift from the spring. And then if you need to make some adjustments for lean, offset, constant load, what have you, you would add one of what they called trim pack spacers, or basically a thin little shim spacer that you put on your top hat. Now, obviously stacking spacers is less than an optimal solution. One, if you have something that leans, like Toyotas like to lean, the issue is an imbalance in weight, and the best way to offset that is with preload. Not only does that jack the weight more evenly across the chassis, it offsets the sag within the suspension itself. So you have the same amount of travel at all sides, where you can optimize your bump travel while still getting the height you want. The other issue was they had to somewhat limit height or the overall length on the struts, simply because they had to still allow you some leeway to run those trim packer spacers. If they went as long as they could go, if you added those spacers, you would have CV bind, upper control arm issues, everything like that. When OME went to design and make the MT64s, they knew they wanted to get a bigger, thicker body, and simply put, the springs they were using for the old Nitrocharger Sports weren't going to fit over this giant 2.8-inch diameter body, so they needed to make some thicker springs. On the other side, the BP-51 coilover springs generally wouldn't work on an application like this, just because top hat designs and spring perch designs are just different. So with those larger springs, that corrected the issue with the MT64s, but meant the old Nitrocharger Sports were too small for the springs, or the bodies were too narrow for the springs. So what they did was, rather than reinvent the wheel on the Nitrocharger Sport, which was working well enough as is, they went up to the Plus and gave you a little extra thickness. Now, obviously, the biggest visual change is that the bodies were thicker, so they could use those new, bigger springs. And truth be told, having a little thicker body, having a little bit more oil flow was something they certainly could have used. But the biggest thing that we're most excited about is now they include trim packer spacers for preload rather than going on the top hat. So they include a couple spacers that are designed to do 5 millimeters of preload adjustment at a time, which one can help you offset lean, two, get you a little bit more ride height than the springs themselves provide, and three, can help you add more preload and offset the sag you get from additional constant load. What this means is those springs are still doing most of your lift. So as your rig grows, this allows you to pretty much most likely keep the same springs and just add preload spacers to offset the additional constant weight as it comes, which we love. Not having to buy another set of springs every time you add something onto your rig is something we definitely love to see. Being the more budget-oriented option of the bunch, if you have something like a Forerunner that has a coilover strut in the front and a separate spring and shock in the back, you're looking at around $1,000 for this set. And if you have something like a Tacoma that has the same front suspension but might have leaf springs and shocks in the back, you're looking at more like $1,400 and $1,500, including everything from the struts, springs, shocks, whole nine. I briefly touched on that these MT64s forced a little bit of a shakeup in the OME catalog, and certainly going to a circlip adjustable big piston monotube design was the furthest thing we were expecting from OME, but we can't think of a company that's better suited to give this style of shock a shot. Simply put, the monotube design over a twin tube will almost always have a bigger piston if body sizes are the same, but these MT64s are huge at 2.8 inches in diameter on the body, 64 millimeters on the piston, and that's actually the biggest piston we have on the table here. A bigger piston generally means that they can provide even more potential dampening force without having to be valved as stiff as a smaller piston shock like these Nitrochargers. In English, that means you can get more big bump support, better handling, better stability under a load without sacrificing as much compliance compared to a tiny piston twin tube like these. Taking what they learned from their big internal bypass BP-51s, OME thought it would be a great idea, and we agree, to include an internal hydraulic stop for the rebound side so that when the suspension fully extends, it won't top out as harshly as a lot of other shocks would, particularly on independent suspension vehicles with coilover strut suspension like your average Toyota. We do find we're always fighting a balance between having adequate droop travel to reduce harsh top outs and getting the lift we want. So having that little bit of extra cushion at the top will definitely allow you to get away with a little bit more lift without as many drawbacks. A lot like similar shocks within this space, they use circlips to further adjust preload and ride height. But like the Nitrocharger Plus, most of your lift is coming from those springs, and rather than using little spacers, they use these circlip grooves to give you those same 5 millimeters of preload adjustment. This means probably not going to be able to get it to stock height, but if their springs match close to the lift height you're looking for, we do think this might be the better alternative compared to what everybody else does. As far as price goes, we do really think these MT64s are the sweet spot in the range and arguably offer the most bang for your buck. Tacoma kits with leaf springs are probably going to come in at around $2,750 to $2,850, and 400 kits or similar are going to be around $2,150 to $2,350. We are actually offering to assemble these for free as an introductory offer. So if this is something you guys were considering, it'd be a good time to jump on them now while you can get them built for free. Now at the top of their range and at the top of our list of more trail-oriented shocks, these BP-51s are about as comfortable as it gets when you're taking it easy off-road, where other shocks at this price point are really optimized to provide race level performance in a bolt-on shock package. These are designed to give you more comfort, control, and stability out on the trail at more reasonable speeds. Now this does mean they might be a tick behind the other guys when you're absolutely ripping. They'll still put up with a lot of ham-fisted hooliganery. We think the biggest component to why they ride so plush is their internal bypass design. This video is not supposed to be a grandiose dissertation on all the different position sensitive designs. We'll save you those details here, but if that is a video you guys are interested in, make sure to comment below and let us know. Now, in simple terms, the OME internal bypass design essentially works by having a lot of valving, a lot of stiff valving in that main piston, and then inside the body they have relief ports that allow oil to flow around the piston in that primary ride zone, and then as the shock compresses or extends out of that zone, you start to get progressive support because oil is forced through the stiff valving of the main piston. What that really means is in the middle of your travel where you are most of the time, they can be set up more compliant and softer because they provide more progressive support when you're going to bottom them out or top them out. This gives you better small bump compliance and much better big bump support as well. Now, this design is largely beneficial in almost every category, but it's not without its faults. Probably the most notable drawback to that design is that the whole internal bypass assembly has to be contained within the shock body itself, which means they are limited to a 51mm piston, although they get the same 2.8-inch body as the MT64. Yes, you heard that right. The BP-51s actually have a smaller piston than the MT64. The position-sensitive dampening certainly helps with that, but that is the big reason why they can't keep up with a lot of the other guys when you're really pushing it hard. Simply put, they don't have the dampening force from a piston that's as big as theirs. Now, the other thing is a problem with any position-sensitive dampener, and that's they're sensitive about their position. You want to set this up at a ride height that maximizes the primary ride zone, so you're in that nice little plush space for maximum ride quality. You're not in the top out or bottom out zones when you're just cruising down the road. This means that on vehicles that have a separate shock and spring like your Jeep, you might see that the lengths might allow for a bigger lift range than they list, but they give you a little bit of a tight, like a 1-inch lift range, like 2.5 to 3.5, so you stay in that zone. On coilovers like you see here for something like a Tacoma or a 4Runner, a Tundra, Land Cruiser, Bronco, whatever, although OME will give you a fairly wide range of ride height adjustment, we often recommend our customers stay somewhere in the middle of that. So if, let's say, it's a 0 to 3-inch shock like the Tacomas are, we usually say 1 to 2 is where you want to be. Now, you've probably noticed these OME BP-51s are also compression and rebound adjustable, which rebound adjustment is something we don't see enough from suspension companies and is well worth it, particularly when you're changing preload and weight and want to dial your vehicle in more. A lot of times, you know, as we lift these vehicles higher, they want to top out more. You need more rebound dampening, and sometimes we are too stiff on compression already, but still want better handling. Rebounds there for you. The one flaw with this design is that it is only adjusting within the primary ride zone. So it's changing how much oil flow comes out through those bypass ports. And because of that, they have to put them on the body. On a normal shock, this already makes them a little difficult to adjust, but if you can see on these coilovers, you have to fit your wrench for adjustment between the springs, and depending on where you have your preload adjusted, it can be hard to get to those settings. As you imagine, as you preload the spring, the distances between the coil wraps change, the location of each wrap of coil changes, and sometimes they're just straight up in the way of you getting to that adjustment. Now, with that said, once adjusted accordingly, they will definitely reward you for it. And they have probably one of the widest ranges of adjustment that we've seen on any damper. You can get them so soft it's dangerous, so stiff it's dangerous, which means you can really dial it in for how you want it to feel or the weight you might be carrying. Now, you just heard me mention their preload adjustment, and these are the only coilovers in OME's range, or only true threaded body coilover in OME's range, which means Yes, you still get the preload adjustment, but since it's on a threaded collar, you have almost infinite adjustment within their recommended range, which is super nice for getting things dialed in exactly how you like it. OME usually springs these kits with a spring that can be adjusted for stock weight vehicles or even vehicles with a lot of weight. So just like these other shocks, you get one spring and it'll probably last the life of your rig, even as you change weight with it. They also generally use a 3-inch ID flat ground spring. So in the off chance that spring they specially designed for your application is not optimal for the weight you were carrying, there's generally other options from almost every other major spring manufacturer. Although the BP-51s are by far and away the most expensive shock setup that OME sells, they are an unbelievable value and certainly give you more for your money than the competition. Something like a Fox 2.5 or King 2.5 adjustable comes in at a very similar price, but is not position sensitive, doesn't have rebound adjustment, and I can almost guarantee these OMEs are going to last longer between services. So although you're spending a lot of money, you can be confident that you're going further with that money than you would be with most anything else. Now on a setup like a 4Runner or something similar, you're looking at $3,200 to $3,400. And on a Tacoma, so something with leaf springs, you're looking at around $4,500. So if you're gonna ball out for the best you can get, at least you know with these OME BP-51s, you're getting more than your money's worth. So which option is right for you? Ultimately, budget's gonna obviously be the biggest deciding factor, but we do think the MT64s are going to give you the best bang for your buck. Now, if your budget only allows for the Nitrocharger Sports, that's totally fine and more power to you. In fact, we do think these will get you just as far down the trail as the more expensive options. It's just the more expensive options will be able to do it far more comfortably and will be able to get you there without you having to tiptoe over every single obstacle. The twin tube design does work off-road, but it's fairly limited in dampening force. So to work on heavy-weighted rigs like they're designed for, they need a lot of valving, and that can make them feel a little harsh at times. And when pushed off-road, they can fade pretty quickly. The larger diameter body of the MT64 is going to mean they can be more compliant, be more stable, be more supportive, and be more consistent. Yes, they are a lot more money, but we do think they give you more for your money, particularly when you compare them to how hard you're going to be working your spine with the Nitrocharger Plus. Now, these MT64s are not the most plush thing on the market. They're not the most comfortable thing on the market, but they give you a lot of comfort for your money. If you are willing to spend top dollar for the best ride at moderate speeds off-road or out on the trail on the way to work, we have yet to find something that is quite as comfortable as this BP-51 at a similar price, at least at moderate speeds off-road. Of course, like I said, there are shocks that are a little better when you're pushing it harder, but nothing seems to be as comfortable as these BP-51s are in the situations where we think most drivers are getting into. We love to believe that we're going mock Jesus over whoops every weekend, but the reality is most of us are just cruising to a campsite, getting to work, and at most going through a rock garden where something as comfortable as these BP-51s is a godsend. Overall, yes, we love budget-oriented options, and if that gets you out on the trail, we love to see it. But if you can foresee an MT64 within your budget, save that little bit of extra money, even if it takes a couple months, and we do think that is the way to go. Now, like I said, if you've been pining over high performance options, looking for more comfort rather than all-out off-road support and performance, BP-51 is the way to go. They're not cheap, but like we said, they give you more for your money than just about anything else at this price point. As always, if you're interested or have questions about these OMEs or anything else we carry, make sure you hop on shocksurplus.com or leave us a comment below. Otherwise, make sure you're subscribed so that you get a notification about the next episode of Shock Talk. And in the meantime, we'll see you guys out on the trails.